And so I was really interested in the translation across languages and the emotions that get articulated in one language but not the other. For instance, my mother is extremely funny and talkative and verbose in Cantonese. In English, she is very reserved. And that multiplicity of selves in one person, that for me was first visible through language, really fascinated me. So in some ways, Simple Recipes, that first book is about the unsaid. And it's about this barrier between parent and child, which is such an intimate bond. And yet, it's really, we were born in different worlds, you know, my parents and I. And so a lot of Simple Recipes is about exploring that, I think.
In your latest book, Dogs at the Perimeter, I put a copy on the desk there. You explore this alienation of the child to a much more extreme example with the genocide in Cambodia. And I find this amazing. I'm not sure whether you're aware, but Canadian authors have been pushing the envelope here a little bit in bringing out stories that no one is telling. I mean, I'm sure you're all aware of Life of Pi, but then there's the cellist from Sarajevo, and then there's Madeleine Thien's book that do not take place in Canada, or a small part of it takes place in Canada, but they discuss major historical traumas that remain at the edge of our awareness, and these books provide an amazing inner narrative to those historical figures that we may have just seen fleetingly in the newspapers or in the television. And what is it you think about Canada? Is it the space that allows you to contemplate these great atrocities, that gives you the possibility to reflect upon them and actually bring out these stories that can somewhat, in most cases, can be so overwhelming? Like, I found myself as overwhelmed as the characters that when she just recalls one image and she's overwhelmed. And these great events in history are so overwhelming. And yet, you as an author are tackling these and bringing the inner life of these forgotten people to us, so we can understand what they went through.
You know, Canada is a really interesting place. I think it's interesting partly because it doesn't have a singular narrative. So we have a First Nations Indigenous history, we have French and English, and more in between all of that. And I think the benefit of having no singular dominant narrative, as they do have in the United States, is that every story can make a claim for being a story of the place. And I find that that's an incredible liberty as a writer. And I also think it's actually more truthful to the world, because we're completely implicated in each other's geopolitics. And in the case of Cambodia, it is almost impossible to tell the story of Cambodia without talking about the Western presence in Southeast Asia, the Vietnam War, and Kissinger's bombing, Nixon's bombing of Cambodia. When I think about the landscape that I came of age in as a writer, it is, you know, Michael Ondaatje and the English Patient and Anna's Ghost about Sri Lanka, and Rohinton Mystery writing about India, Ravi Haj writing about Lebanon, and the stories of Alice Munro talking about the lives of women in these small Canadian towns that become universal. And I think, as I must say, I always fear this will change in Canada. There's always a kind of movement towards greater conservativeness. There's always a movement towards trying to find that singular narrative. And I think as writers like me, not all writers, but writers like me are always trying to resist that grander story. But it's a novel that began about a Japanese neurologist who has gone missing. And initially the story seems to be about his brother who worked for the Red Cross in Cambodia prior to the victory of the Khmer Rouge and the Cambodian genocide. It turns out that the novel is about a woman who as a child grew up in Phnom Penh and loses her family in the genocide. But most of it she hasn't really confronted in a very direct way. In the end, it's really a novel about telling other people's stories, and the way that she tries to gain her survival is to tell the story of this doctor who has gone missing in Cambodia. So I'm going to read that part. So this is a man named James. He is a Japanese doctor with the Red Cross. He survives the genocide, but in the years following, he's looking for his family, including his wife, a woman named Sawyer. The last letter comes to James much later. He is standing at the Laos-Cambodia border, and it is 1981, 2 years since the Khmer Rouge was defeated. In all that time, James, now known as Kwan, a mute, a smuggler, and a solitary man, has heard the most remarkable stories. The people who have been recovered, the strange ways in which children were protected, the objects returned to their owners' hands. The stories are repeated so often they change into fairy tales of the most devastating kind. Chorn was right. Phnom Penh is the city of before. 5-year-olds fending for themselves, and the Khmer Rouge, arrogant, still prideful in their stronghold in the north, still holding their seat at the United Nations, conspiring to take the city back. It is no longer the agitated place that he remembers. No, the dial has ticked back and stripped the place of people and goods. It is a city now where the kids run naked, where people walk around with photographs of missing family, where men and women dress in hothouse colors, clashing motifs, to push back the memory of black clothes and black hearts. Those barbarians had sawed off the hands of the ancient Buddhas and thrown them in the water, but now the children fish them up and stack them on the riverside and try to sell them to the aid workers and the off-duty Vietnamese. Other, more terrible losses come up from the mud. That night, sitting on a mound of stones, James hears someone playing music on a record player. A man calls out the name Soria, and he lifts his head and sees a thin woman dancing slowly, her wrists turning in the same way they must have done decades ago when she was a girl and this was Indochina, and the French swanned down the wide boulevards and hid their guilt in a veil of opium smoke. Khmer dance is its own language. This is what Darit had once explained. This gesture means you have come across a flower, a lotus, and you're offering it. And this gesture is water. Water, water everywhere, Soria had said. Come and dance with me, Darit. Nothing so classical, just the rambam, just the lindy harp. Wait, Darit had said. Let me take your photo. Click away, she said. Here she is now, in his pocket. He had felt at the time lonely, an outsider watching these two siblings, this self-sufficient love. But he knows now there are no outsiders. There is no walking away at the end. Delusion has to finish somewhere. It has to end, or else weakness will outlast them all. He has to commit to something or be done. From Kampart, he travels to the prison, where he passed nearly 2 years. In the storehouse, boxes are rotting in the feet, files and pages, confusions, accusations. He went through them and found the 6th letter from Soria, the last one, the same thin weight of paper, but her handwriting had deteriorated, the pen had hardly any ink. Who was she writing to? Not James anymore, or not just James. They're throwing us away, she wrote, and I can't understand why, because all I wanted was for the war to end, no matter who won. I never admitted any allegiance. My name is Soria. I am the sister of Darit. the daughter of Cravan and Mary, the wife of James. I was a teacher. There was a biography and a confession, and in the biography was the name of their son, just as Chon had told him. The prison file had dates, but no date of death. There was not even a photograph. There was no file for the baby, and he dared to believe that they had been absolved, that she wandered like him with a different name and a new soul. Everyone is searching. Everyone is looking into every passing face and wondering if the next person along the road will be the beloved, the dreamt of. Maybe this life is the dream. If gods existed, he would still be waking up to the sound of her moving through the apartment. Here she is now, coming into the room to wake him. Here she is.